Hello, happy Sabbath. I don't know if anybody's on, but should be working. I don't know if it tells me when people join. Tap to invite a viewer. Oh, Mimi! Hi, Mimi. You're the only one watching right now, but people will continue to join. And so I'm excited that you're here, and I love you, and I miss you. Can you hear me okay? I don't know. Oh, we have another person. They're stacking up. 3 people now. Here we go. I'm so excited to be sharing the word. Oh, and Christian. Sweet. That's awesome. Super excited to be sharing the word with my home church and my family, Christian and Mimi. Pastor Andre asked me to do this. What's up, Al? How's it going? Hi, Denise. Super great sharing with you guys. Can you hear me all right? I don't know how acoustics are here, but should be fine. Cool. Glad to know that you can hear me well. So this morning for me, as we just wait for more people to hop on, Sabrina and I adopted a dog. And so we are so excited. Little black dog named Tucker. Actually, he's like 60 pounds. So he's like a little bit bigger than a little dog. But first dog we've ever officially owned. I've ever officially owned. And so I am so excited to be owning a dog because that's amazing. Yep, got a thumbs up for Olivia on that one. So, yeah, I guess we can go ahead and start. My name is, sorry, for those who may be watching who may not know me, my name is Chandler Tarbox. I was born in Washington State and then moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I've gone to Cross Church basically my entire life since I was 7. And so being able to preach and share the word with my home church all these years later is fantastic. I am a theology major, actually, and I'm graduating in just 3 weeks. And so I am super excited to finally be done with school. That's one thing. And then to be doing ministry. What's up, Mr. Camp? How's it going? Miss you. To be doing ministry full time, I accepted a position as youth pastor of Spring Meadows Church in Florida. And so I know it's a long way from New Mexico, but I'll be visiting and we'll see what God has in store. Who knows? After seminary or a little bit down the road where we'll be. So that's exciting to be going to Spring Meadows here. We're moving in about a month. So my first day at Spring Meadows is June 1st. So that's very soon. I'll be youth pastor to the high school and middle school. It'll be a different experience, especially with the COVID-19. If I'm there June 1st, I'm not sure if they will be back in church by then. So it may be a different start, but definitely for sure, like I'm just gonna be telling people about Jesus. So that's coolest job ever. Before I get started, I thought I brought my water bottle in here, but I did not. So I will sprint and grab the water bottle, and then I will dive into this here little word. I wish I had a desk because it would be a lot more professional. I see a lot of people who do Zoom meetings now with COVID-19 talking behind a desk. So that's the next move once I'm in Florida. I'll get a desk and I'll be professional. But for now, I think it kind of matches my personality to be much more casual. Yeah. All right, so I appreciated Pastor Andre's introduction of me this morning at worship. If you missed it, he just talked a little bit about how I met Sabrina and married her, and we traveled Spain and traveled Europe a little bit, and now we're at Southern. So I wanted to share with you guys a little bit about the time in Spain. right when we started dating, we were talking long distance because I was at Southwestern, like Pastor Andre mentioned, and she was at Southern, where I am now. And we started dating at a summer camp. And immediately after summer camp, she went and started college abroad in Spain. And I had never thought about college abroad. When I thought about traveling, I wanted to go to Paris, and that was pretty much it. Very cliche. That was my dream. But after doing a semester of long distance with her in Spain, and then with me at Southwestern, I was like, all right, God, I'm going to need another option here. And so I asked him a really big question. I was like, hey, God, can I go to Spain? And he opened the door in a huge, huge, miraculous manner of providing scholarship and providing a second advisor, because I was sure my first advisor was going to say no. And when my college abroad advisor said no, we called the president of the organization, and the president of the organization gave me permission to go. So God just opened door after door and providing for me to go to Spain. So that was a major blessing. And so when I got to Spain, things were very different. It's so funny. Pastor Andre talked about how he hasn't had any New Mexican food since the quarantine began. And that was one of the things that I missed so much when I was in Spain. I don't know. I guess just being in New Mexico, you don't realize how spicy food is and how amazing it is. You don't appreciate it, you take it for granted. And then when you're away, it's just mind-blowing that people can eat foods without green chili. That's something that I'm kind of experiencing here in Tennessee, a green chili-less life. Actually, we have about quarter of a jar left, so we're still holding on. I had some green chili this morning, so that's good. But being in Spain was a culture shock to me. They spoke a totally different language. Driving around here, everybody has their own car. They drive their own car wherever they want, whenever they want. And there, traveling around is by taxi and by bus and by plane, even from city to city. And it's a little like each country is a state, but way more densely packed. And so being there, it was just so shocking to be in a completely new place, not for like a couple days on vacation, but being there for 5 months. And so it took me a little while to adjust. They had shared in advance through the manual that sometimes people go through severe culture shock and they experience depression, and they long for home so much that they have trouble sleeping, they have trouble eating, they just miss it to the point that their body starts trying to react that, hey, something's wrong in your mind, you need to change something about your situation. And so that's that's some of the more severe cases. I remember going into their grocery store, and one, everybody speaks Spanish, and so asking where something is a little bit difficult, but not having those name brands like Oreo and Lay's and all those things, and then going to the meat area, and they're just like giant squids and fish staring at me. It was just a totally terrifying situation. Culturally shocking, definitely. And so the sermon of my title, if you saw, you clicked on the link, is Culture Shock. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about that from the perspective of the Bible and the book of Daniel. So before we go any further, I'm going to send up a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this opportunity to share a word from you with my family, my church family at Corrales, God. I thank you for just growing me as an individual and us as a church congregation, God, to anytime we're going to grow, it's going to be uncomfortable. And this COVID-19 corona crisis is definitely uncomfortable. And I ask that you will just bless us as we open your word, as we look and try and figure out what you're trying to tell us. Let your spirit be upon each household that's hearing this, and just open our eyes to see your goodness, Father. In your name, amen. So we're going to be in, I miss you, Miss Gurley, as well, and Ned, the whole family. Let me respond to some of these comments. That's how it was when I lived in Memphis, Tennessee. The green chili, the lack of green chili, or the density of the population. That's true. Both of those are true. And Uncle Sherman, you had a black lab named Tucker. I remember Tucker. That's a good name for a dog. So like I said, we're going to be in the book of Daniel. So I want you, if you're watching on your phones, that means you have to get out your Bible. Or if you're watching on your laptop, then you can just use your phone. But follow along with me in the Word, because that's a smart thing to do. Daniel 1, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. So, what's significant about the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah? That's a mouthful to begin with. But I don't know about you, but that kind of means nothing to me. And so that's kind of how a lot of things happen, is that if something traumatic happens in your life, it's out of the blue, a year, a day, a week that you weren't expecting. It just kind of smacks you in the side and you're in shock. And so that's what's happening here with Daniel. It gives the year so that theologians can be able to decipher the history surrounding and that sort of thing. But to the average, listener, I think what we can get out of this is that it comes out of nowhere. We're going to continue in verse 2. It says, "And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles of the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God." So I kind of want to open this up a little bit. It says, "And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand." And so, giving you, I guess, a little context to the story that's happening here. This is Jerusalem after the time of Abraham, after the time of Moses, after the time of David. And this is supposed to be, the Jews thought, God's people. They surrounded the temple with the idea that as long as the temple stood, they were never going to be defeated. There was no army that could ever take it. But Jehoiakim walks in, sieges Jerusalem, and takes it. Not only does he take Jerusalem, but he goes into the temple and takes the articles from the temple of God and puts it back in Babylon in the treasure house of his God. And so the entire world of the Jewish people at that point was just destroyed. Their mentality that God was watching over, was protecting them, was in jeopardy. Their misunderstandings of God's role in protecting them as a nation were challenged. And so we look at this text and it says, "And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand." And as we read that, it sounds like at face value that God just killed a lot of his people. That God allowed a foreign leader to come in and to siege and to kill all of the people that God claimed as his people. And so as a Jewish reader, you might have a problem with that. As a reader that believes in God, that God protects his people, and that he never lets harm fall to his people, you might have a problem with that God delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. I want to take a second to explain a little bit of the culture differences between the writers of the Bible and us as Western region readers of the Bible. There's other cases in the Bible where it says that certain leaders were delivered into their hands, or God used someone to accomplish his will. And from the Eastern, or the Bible, the Middle East, by using the word delivered into his hand, talking about Nebuchadnezzar, it's not necessarily saying that God made it happen. That God predestined Jehoiakim to be put into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. Many times when it says that God allowed something to happen, or God delivered something, God made something happen, it's pointing out that God is supremely in control. That in actuality, unless God allows something to happen, There's no way it can happen. And so by God allowing Jehoiakim to be taken by Nebuchadnezzar, by allowing Jerusalem to be taken by Nebuchadnezzar, God is the one who delivered it. And so to us, with a Western mindset, we're really easy to want to pick blame and say, all right, who's the one who's at fault here? And that's kind of different than the Jewish mindset. And so the question, I guess, here is, if God allows something to happen, is it the same thing as God making it happen? And that's a huge question for the COVID crisis that we're going through right now. I think that God can allow something to happen and it's not his perfect will. It would be so much more amazing in our mindsets to not have the COVID crisis at all. For people to keep their jobs, to people to not be dying from a disease, for people to be able to be in community once again. But the COVID crisis is the just clear picture exhibit of what happens when sin is allowed to run rampant. And so we're able to see, all right, what would a world look like if God weren't there? We only see a portion of that in the COVID crisis. And so when God allows it to happen, he's trying to show us what will be if we walk away from God. Everything good belongs to God. And so in him allowing certain things to happen, it's not that he makes it happen, that he predestines it to happen, but it's more so that he is in some supreme control. And so that's something that it's not a clear-cut answer. It's not satisfying down to our soul, but it's provided me a little bit of peace in understanding the sovereignty of God and how it applies to these types of biblical situations and how it applies to world situations. We're going to continue reading verse 3. Verse 3 reads, "The king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility, young men without physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians." So I want to take a second to really think and try and put ourselves in the situation that Daniel may have been in previous to the siege of Nebuchadnezzar. I'm sure Daniel went about his normal daily life in Jerusalem before the siege, before the attack on the city. He probably went to the same market every week to get his different groceries of that time. I don't know what those may have been. Lamb, oats, oil, flour. I'm pretty sure those are biblical food items. And so he went to the same market to get those things. He saw the same people. He may have went to a school or went to a trade. He had a job and occupation. He had a schedule. He had a way of life that he went about every day, every week, every month, and it was a cycle. He'd go to the feast days when that was happening. He'd go to the temple for his sacrifices. He had this schedule and routine, this culture that he lived in, this Jewish culture that had been set up and had continued growing and developing. And out of the blue, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, we don't know that out of the blue, that's completely disrupted. Everything changes as Nebuchadnezzar sieges and attacks the city. People are killed and people are taken from the place that they love, their homes, their occupations, their jobs, and they're forced into another city with different people, different circumstances, different situations where they're not used to. They have to go to a different market. They have to go and try and, one, survive with the situation that they're in, try and deal with the anxiety and stress of being in a totally new culture, and then from there on start to adjust and start to figure things out. And so that's the situation that Daniel's going through at this time. He's experiencing severe culture shock, I'm sure, of having different foods, of having a different language, of different style of dress, of a different place, a different schedule for himself, a different way of communicating one person to another. And so that's what he had to have been experiencing at this point. Reading on at verse 5, It says, the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after they were to enter the king's service. So here the king is trying to figure out exactly how he can bring up the greatest kingdom. And he understands that leadership isn't just resting on one person, but it rests on many. And so he sets up advisors from the different kingdoms that he takes over, right? And so taking over Jerusalem, he chooses the best looking, the smartest, most handsome, the ones who are quick to learn, quick to understand, and qualified to serve, and he chooses them to be advisors. And the king recognizes the importance of diet. He was misinformed on the specifics of it, but he understood that there is a difference between good eating and bad eating. And the poor people of that time were just trying to find whatever scraps they could. And so in his misunderstanding, he assigned what he thought was the optimum diet for the goal, the purpose that he wanted these people to serve. And so he gives them rich food and wine from his own table. Verse 6, among those who were chosen were some from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave these names to Daniel, the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. You guys recognize these names, I'm sure. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. So Daniel recognized the same thing that the king's advisor and the king recognized. He recognized the importance of diet, of the things that you put into your body and how they change your perspective about the world around you. I think Daniel recognized the importance of that moment, the importance of being taken from one culture and being shoved into another one, of losing everything that you had and you loved and being thrown into a whole new world. And so he had no control. He had no control of where he was living, of the occupation he was going to serve, of being able to come and go as he pleased. His freedoms were stripped from him. And so in having nothing to control, he, with God's blessing, tried to take control of the very basic building blocks of life. His diet, his intake. And as he was allowed to, as we continue reading, the king's advisor allows him to eat and drink the things that he pleases, which end up being what the Bible says is vegetables to eat and water to drink. And as we look at the Hebrew word, it's expanded not just vegetables, but also grains and nuts, and basically a vegan diet. And as we read, Daniel takes on this diet, and he looks healthier and smarter and more nourished in just 10 days. Not only that, as we read in verse 17, to these young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand the visions and dreams of all kinds. So they recognized the importance of what they were putting in their body and how they treated their body in this time of culture shock, in this moment when things mattered to a higher degree because of the growth they would experience, and the way that they would respond either positively or negatively would affect the rest of their lives. And so in this moment when they had nothing else to control in this culture shock, they decided to take control and to follow God's guidance on what things that they should eat and what things that they shouldn't eat. And I think this extends even further, that there's certain things like exercise and sleep and keeping on a schedule that in culture shock radically affect what we're going through, radically affect our mindset and our ability to process the trauma and the different situations, the different work life, the different experiences we're experiencing. And had Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego not taken on this diet, who knows where they would have been? Who knows if they would have been able to continue advising at the level that they were? It's amazing that when we allow God to sort of align things in the way that He directs, that He just opens doors and causes growth in a whole new way, in a way that totally changes our potential, our purpose. As we continue, I'm going to jump just a little bit to Daniel 3. And we all know this story. It's the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego on the plains of Dura. And King Nebuchadnezzar makes this huge golden statue. This huge golden statue represents the kingdom of Babylon. And the fact that King Nebuchadnezzar wants it to reign not just through one kingdom's length of time, but through the entirety of history. And so King Nebuchadnezzar makes this giant statue. He sets it up between the inner wall and the outer wall in the plains of Dura, and all the people gather around. All the people gather around. They play the instruments, and the people of Babylon, all the slaves, all the people from different countries, all those who had been conquered, all in unison bow down to the sounds of the instruments. Everyone in the entire kingdom bows down except Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so we know the story. They are thrown. Well, first, the king gives them a second chance. He says, all right, maybe you guys misunderstood. Y'all are my advisors. You guys may have been working on other things. You may have had a different project, but let me explain it to you just so you can have it clear. When the instruments play, what I'm going to need you to do is bow down to this idol of me. And they say no. They say we're not going to bow down. Even if you throw us into the furnace and we die, we're not going to bow down. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego decided beforehand how they were going to respond to idolatry. Coming from Jerusalem into Babylon, I'm sure they thought about the risk it was going to be. Being surrounded by things they weren't ordinarily surrounded with. Being in a situation, in a culture that is totally different than what you're used to. We as humans thrive generally in a schedule. We're used to seeing the same things every day. We're used to the same temptations, the same difficulties and struggles. Even the human body is built up for consistency. When you start working out and you do one type of workout, your body gets really good at that type of workout. So much so that it stops growing, and you kind of have to shock your muscles with a different type of exercise in order to get growth back, to continue and not to plateau. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego realized that they were going to be in a different situation than they were used to. They realized that there were people around them who may not have the same belief system. They may be asked, requested, or commanded to put something in the place of God. And so they decided in that moment, I'm not sure when they decided, but at that moment, God provided the faith, and they did not bow down to the idol. The second time, when King Nebuchadnezzar played the instruments again for them personally to bow down, they did not bow down. And they were thrown into the furnace. Nebuchadnezzar looks into the furnace, and he doesn't see 3 people, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sees 4 people. Now, the power of this, of looking into the furnace, looking into the position where their life becomes the most difficult they would ever face, when it would require the most faith to be able to survive. It's not just Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego with the miracle of survival, standing up for their faith, refusing to bow down to an idol. It's Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Jesus in the furnace, in the struggle, in the trial, in the midst of everything, the flames. Jesus is right there kicking it with his boys. He's right there supporting them. I'm not sure what kind of conversation went on, but to know that when things get the most difficult, that's when Jesus shows up. Not just with the miracle of helping you to get through, but personally, in person, visiting you in a way that just totally changes your mentality of what it means for Jesus to be alive again with us. And so as we try and understand this story, I think it's important to see that in culture shock, in the struggle of difficulty, Jesus shows up when you need him most. That there's certain idols that we may be asked to bow down to, requested to bow down to, or commanded to bow down to. But when we stand up for God and we say, even though I'm in culture shock, even though everybody around me may be bowing down to this idol, even though everything in me says, hey, put this person, put this device, put this vice in my life before God, deciding beforehand and calling out to God for faith, you can stand strong and God will be there personally with you in the flames. The Bible doesn't really describe, but I have to wonder what type of faith builders may have been for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego before the furnace. I've seen in my own life that as I give pieces and portions of my life to God that are tiny, that God builds my faith in a way that later on, weeks, months, years later, when I have a huge struggle, a huge faith battle that requires me to call out to God and to lean on him when I don't have strength, that those little battles in the past, that those little things that I thought were insignificant or I thought were small or may not have been important, those were the things that prepared me to stand up for God when everything in me and everything around me was calling me to bow down to something else. And so the Bible doesn't really elaborate on what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego experienced in order to prepare them for this trial with the furnace, but it's cool to wonder, and I think there's a lot of power in recognizing that it's not just the big things, but it's the small things that we can really refuse to bow down to idols, refuse to place things in front of Christ. And so as we examine the culture shock within Daniel, we know the importance of diet, of being intentional, of controlling the things that are within control that aren't just minor things, but they impact our mentality and our perspective and our attitude. And in culture shock, understanding the value of deciding beforehand that God is worth standing up for, that God is worth risking our lives for, risking our neck for, and that he will provide in the moment, even if it takes him personally showing up to provide. God will provide. We're going to jump one last time to Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6, another absolute favorite of my childhood. God shows up in an amazing way and just busts down the door to the expectations of kings. It's Daniel in the lion's den. And I'm actually taking a class in Daniel this semester for my finishing up my degree. And so it's been really interesting learning a bunch of historical background. And I'm writing a paper actually on Darius, the king of Medo-Persia. And so right here it's talking about how Daniel 6 verse 1, it says, "It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel." I've read over this and I haven't really understood the significance of those 2 sentences. Once again, we have a king who really knows what he's doing. Nebuchadnezzar knew what he was doing. He immediately switched the cultural diet for the one that he thought would be most successful in bringing advisors up to serve the purpose. And here, Darius is doing a similar thing. He's acting very wisely. He establishes 120 satraps, which are basically governors, rulers throughout the area that was just conquered. They were in the middle of a feast, and the Medo-Persians came and raided Babylon. And as that was happening, as that transition of power happened, verse 6 picks up immediately after that. And so now Daniel's living in the same city, but he's living under the rule of the Medo-Persians. And King Darius is establishing governors among the people who they already trusted, just under the title of Persia, Medo-Persia, instead of under the title of Babylon. And so he's getting people that the normal citizens trust to bring the matters that the citizens are talking about, concerned with, that are going on in their lives up higher and higher to the next level of governors, which is just 3 administrators, one of whom is Daniel, and then up to the king if it's that important. And so that's how he establishes his government. And Daniel does such a good job. He does such an amazing job performing his role with wisdom, advising, and doing so in a way that he's not corrupted by bribes. He's not corrupted by a want for power or control. That his co-workers, the other advisors, and even the governors below him start scheming. They start trying to figure out a way to take him down a notch off of his level, to get him, if they can, just out of there completely, because he's making them look bad. They can't slack off. They can't take bribes. They can't do the things that they're wanting to do because Daniel's honoring God in his position in his service, despite the culture shock of being, once again, under a completely new culture, completely new ruler. And so the satraps and advisors frame a question to Darius. And it was framed, someone explained it to me, and the way that they framed it really made a lot more sense to me as to why Darius would accept it. So what I've heard in the past is that they proposed to Darius that there's a new law passed and that they can only pray to Darius for 30 days, and if anyone breaks that law, they'll be thrown into the lion's den. And that kind of out of the blue, it's like, okay, that makes sense. But really more historically, they probably outlined the difficulty in the past of religion, of when a religion isn't changed, when people do not subscribe to the new culture, that's when revolts happen. That's when lives are sacrificed and coups are raised and cities are sieged, and everything generally or many times comes back to religion. And so these satraps are saying, hey, these Babylonians may have had a whole different way of thinking, a whole different way of praying, of religion, and the best way to consolidate power, to bring everything back to Medo-Persia, would be to have a 30-day praying only to Darius law in place. And so Darius, wanting the last thing he'd want is a revolt, subscribes to the idea, he passes the law, and he puts it in place. And Daniel, who had a strong devotional life and who prayed regularly, was panicked. He didn't know what to do. This totally shook him because his identity wasn't in the culture of Babylon. It wasn't in the culture of Persia. It wasn't even in the culture of Judaism. It was in his identity, which was God-given, which relied hugely on conversation with God, prayer with God. And so as we read here in verse, let me find it. Verse 10. If you're following along, Daniel 6, verse 10. Now when Daniel learned this, that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God just as he had done before. And so when Daniel gets shook, when he doesn't know what to do, when he's panicking because his identity in God is being challenged, when his ability to communicate to his father, to his dad is challenged, he does the only thing that he can do. He falls back into that relationship with him. He cries out to God and he says, God, what do I do in this situation? I can't let someone come and put themselves in your place. What do I do? We don't know his exact prayer, but he was crying out to God, and some of the advisors and satraps went together as a group and saw him praying in the window. He was praying in the window like he regularly did. He didn't compromise his walk with God, his pattern of relationship, because of this law. And they go immediately to the king and they turn Daniel in. When Daniel's turned in, the king, with regret, has to throw one of his most trusted advisors into the lion's den. They seal the den, they close it, and they seal it with the ring of the king and some of the advisors so that they know no one came in. If Daniel's saved, it would have to be a miracle from God. The king can't sleep at all that night. He's worried. His most trusted advisor, his friend, is going to die. He goes back the next day, and as we all know, Daniel's alive. The angels closed the mouths of the lions, and God delivered Daniel. The importance of walk with God in a time of culture shock, in a time when everything is different than it used to be, in a time when it feels like your feet are washed out from under you, and you're panicking and you're not sure what to do. That is the time when a walk with God, when prayer and study of the Bible is most necessary, most important. And Daniel recognized this. Daniel knew. And so that's what he did, even at the risk of being thrown into a den of lions. We find ourselves in culture shock right now. We find ourselves in a totally different situation than we used to be. You may have gone to the same job every single day. You may have been doing studies like I was at school, leaving at 8 in the morning, getting back at 5:30 or 6, and you had a schedule. You'd go to the grocery store on Friday. You'd go get clothes when you need to. But now everything is different. I mean, even the fact that I'm preaching over a phone illustrates how different things are currently. And I know that a lot of people may be struggling with the difficulty of trying to figure out how to make sense of what's going on, of how to get a schedule back, of how to communicate and to spend time with their loved ones. I'm in a class, in our beginning of our class meeting, the professor asked, "Hey, how are you guys doing?" And I had multiple classmates share how they're feeling depressed and how they're feeling sad, and it's hard to stay motivated to do school and to wake up on time and not just waste away on Netflix and Hulu and Instagram and scroll on Snapchat. I have other friends who have anxiety that anytime they go out to the grocery store, they're scared that they're gonna contract COVID-19. You may be struggling with loneliness. This is a time unlike any other. Normally you'd be able to go and spend time, get a coffee with a friend, be able to eat with your extended family, invite friends over, to meet with your church family. But this is a time that even families, you're lonely because getting on your last nerve with one another, that sort of thing. I know that there's people struggling with lust and with guilt and boredom and anger, desperation and nervousness about what we're going to do with your husband or your wife being laid off from work, your kids being home trying to make ends meet. And so here we are in culture shock with no idea what to do, no idea how to respond, and wanting to ask God, help God. And so as I've been reading over Daniel for my class, he's just been pointing out different ways to respond to what's going on. And so I think, like Daniel, it's important to recognize that in this time when we feel like we have no control whatsoever, that when we focus on our intake and the things that we're eating and drinking and the amount of sleep that we're getting, that it can have a radical change to our attitude, to our perspective, to our energy levels, to our happiness. And so eating healthfully, drinking lots of water, sleeping regularly, keeping a schedule, exercising, it's easily overlooked, but throughout the entire Bible, the importance of it is emphasized and emphasized over and over again. And so when we give that portion of our lives to God, He opens doors in this current culture shock that we're experiencing that not only help us to survive, but He uses us to a greater purpose. He uses us to a potential where we're able to influence other people for good. That we're able to not just get through what's going on, but be a magnificent blessing that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise if we hadn't been focusing on the little things that we can control. There's so many opportunities being thrown off of what our normal schedule, of our normal defenses to the world for idolatry. We're trying to figure out exactly how to make it in life, living in our homes, being quarantined, going to the grocery store, that sometimes it may be putting yourself in God's position. You may be putting yourself as more important, that, oh, I can talk to my family this way because I'm the most important person here. It may be putting yourself in the position to where you're not going to give because you have to survive. You have to hold on. Otherwise, you're going to lose everything. But God's saying, I will provide for you. It may be spending all of my time on Netflix or playing video games when God is calling me to a greater purpose of growth in this time of quarantine and culture shock. But as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to put anything in the place of God, refused to bow down to anything but God, as we stand for God, if we're thrown into the furnace, we already have been thrown into the furnace with COVID-19. Jesus Himself comes in person to provide. Life is heavy. You may know someone. You may have a family member who's experiencing the effects, who's sick with COVID-19. You may have family members, you yourself may be sick. You may be lost your job. The other struggles outside of COVID-19, nothing to do with this, might be weighing down on you. In the flames, in the difficulty of the furnace, that's when Jesus comes through the most. That's when He provides the faith. That's when He provides the comfort, the love that we need the most. And as we see in chapter 6 of Daniel, that consistent walk with God provides something that nothing else will provide. That coming into the presence of God in prayer, in worship, in Bible study, connects you to your Savior, who's wanting to pour out love and blessings, wanting to give wisdom and different perspective, a change of heart and a change of mind. That when we come into God's presence, it just radically changes everything. And so it's just beautiful to me as I read Daniel, how clearly these things, these principles connected to the crisis that we're going through, connected to the culture shock that we're experiencing. And so I just think it's so appropriate. It just warms my heart being able to share this, how to respond in culture shock with my home church at Corrales. I experienced severe culture shock in my life, that I was in middle school and high school, and things changed radically, fast, overnight. And my life was different. And the Corrales Church and the community at Sandy View Academy changed my life, provided intentionality in mentoring and pointing me in the right direction. And if it wasn't for my church family, I don't know where I'd be. But here I am, 3 weeks from graduating with my bachelor's degree in theology, and I can thank Corrales Church and Sandy View Academy so much for recognizing that I was in culture shock in that moment, that I was experiencing so much difficulty, and to know that my family poured love into my life, poured mentorship into my life, just took care of me, provided for me in a way that I wouldn't have had otherwise, changed my life forever. And so as we move forward in the culture shock of COVID-19, whether it's intentionality in your own life or intentionality in pouring out love into other people's life, God is calling us to move. He's showing us that we can trust Him and have faith in Him, that He's going to provide, and that He's going to come through and be with us personally in the flames. I just want to thank you guys for listening in, for the opportunity to share with you all. I love you all, Corrales Church. Let's end in prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you for just allowing me to share, for providing the words and the insight from your word, God. I just want to just point out how amazing you are, God, that you provide for us, that in the difficulty of what feels like the end of the world with COVID-19 and tornadoes and natural disasters, it hasn't stopped this entire year, God. But you are in control. You love us personally, God. And as we come into your presence, as we start a walk with you, as we grow our walk with you and pray like Daniel prayed, God, you're going to continue to pour out peace and confidence and love into our lives, God. And so I thank you for that. I ask that you will give us the wisdom to take control of the little things that we can, God. Help us to understand the importance of intake and how it can radically change our perspective and our happiness and our energy levels. I pray, God, that you will give us the faith to put you first in our lives. God, thank you for being with us during COVID-19, God, during this culture shock, during this crisis. You're so good. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, I thank you guys once again. It's been amazing sharing with you all. I'm going to have to talk to Pastor Andre, maybe do a Wednesday prayer meeting or something, but this has been fantastic. Once again, love you all. Thank you so much for the love that you've poured into my life. Honestly, this degree, where I am right now, is a testament to what God can do through people like you, through you guys specifically. So, love you all. Catch you later. Thank you, Pastor Andre, for letting me share. Miss you all. Catch ya.